Welcome everyone to the July 2026 Move to France Q&A. My name is Allison Grant Lounes. I am the author of Foolproof French Visas, the owner of Your Transformation, host of the podcast Profiles in Transformation, and I do a lot of things. Our goal is to help you to get the right visa and do the right French admin to create a successful and sustainable life in France. So we are all about not only helping you to get the visa, but we also recognize that that is only the first step in the process of moving to France, and we support you throughout, especially your first year as you arrive, get established. We connect you with some of the wonderful partners that we work with who are present at the summit so that you can have support, whether it's for taxes, banking, insurance, finding a place to live, all of those important things. So in today's Q&A, we are going to jump into the questions that were submitted in advance. Somebody asked in the chat already about when Foolproof French Visit is going to be updated. We released it in January, and by February, there were already some changes that started to be made. So we are actually working right now on updating the text. Now, most of it is going to be the same. There are a few key sections where there are a couple of changes. The fees the fees for validating your visa, requesting a carte de séjour, and renewing a carte de séjour have all been increased as of May 1st. So that's one thing. The DREETS procedure has been clarified and an official document list has been published. There was the Ministry of the Economy's clarification on the rules of remote working, which we will get to in a minute, that shed some additional light on how the visa authorities treat remote work, which is, of course, still different from how the tax authorities are going to interpret those same rules. So, really important to understand the distinction. So those are the main things that are going to change. Also, the monthly amount of income or financial resources for student visas went up. The decree was published in June. The amount goes up, the required amount goes up as of August 1st. So consider it basically implemented already. So those are the main areas where we are focusing our attention on updating the text. I'm not going to re-release it in terms of like it's not going to get a new ISBN or anything like that on Amazon. We're just going to make a few brief updates in the text and re-upload it. If you have purchased the physical copy of the book, send us your review of it and we will add you to our digital copy so that when we do change the text, you'll be able to get the updated version. For those of you who purchased the 2026 edition, probably what I'm going to do is compile like the changes that were made into a much shorter PDF of probably about 5 to 10 pages, so you can just read those updated sections because it's not the whole book that needs an overhaul. It's just some very specific and yet very important details that need to be brought up to date. So we are working on that, and I'm hoping we will get that out by the end of the month. Kim and I are both going on vacation in the month of July, so I'm hoping that we can get those published either before we go or like right when we get back. Okay, so in terms of those updates, the student visa financial resources amount has been 615 euros per month, which is very low, and it has been that amount for, gosh, like 15 years. It was updated recently to be about 60% of SMEEK, so it's now about 870 euros per month. So that amount will be updated in the book. It's a specific percentage of SMEEK, so I'll put the exact figure in the book, and that is per month if you are on a student visa. Now, the other thing is the clarification on the rules related to remote working. So there is a certain person on the internet who is taking credit for the Ministry of the Economy the Ministry of the Interior clarifying its position on remote work. However, the position that has come out is not really at all very clear. So the Ministry of the Economy's position, or not the Ministry of the Economy. The Ministry of the Economy is really who they should have asked, but the Ministry of the Interior is who they did ask. The Ministry of the Interior's position is that it is okay to work remotely on a visitor visa or a visitor status if you meet three conditions. One, that the company and all of its clients and everything is situated outside of France. Two, that the salary is paid outside of France into a foreign bank account. And three, this is the most important thing, that you continue to pay tax on that salary outside of France. Now, this is the key point, and this is what I have been saying for over a decade. You do not get to choose where you pay tax on your income. If you are a tax resident of France, you do not get to choose to pay tax on your salary or your business or your self-employment income outside of France because you are a French tax resident and the tax treaty says that you have to pay taxes on that income to France first. So if you are a tourist and you're in France for, 90 out of 180 days, it's okay to work remotely. If you are on a temporary visitor visa and you are going back to your home country at the end of the year and you are not renewing your visa, you're not getting on the French healthcare system, you're not doing anything that would make you considered to be a tax resident by the French tax authorities, then it's probably okay that you can work remotely on a visitor visa. However, if you are arriving in France to live long term, you have a renewable visa, and you are taking steps in order to establish yourself as a resident of France, then that condition no longer applies. And you would be considered a French tax resident from the day you arrive in France. So, again, our position at Your Transformation has always been, and I've been saying this for over a decade, that if you want to build a long-term life in France that is successful and sustainable, and you would like to renew your visa and eventually work towards getting a 10-year resident card or naturalization, then you need to get a visa type that enables you to work, where you're going to be paying taxes appropriately on your income in France and you're becoming a French tax resident. So I hope that clarifies the situation for you. The wording of the Ministry of the Interior's answer was not very clear at all, and it did not specifically address the questions of taxation or social charges. So again, I think that the Ministry of the Economy would have been the appropriate administration to address this question to in the first place, but that's not who was picked. So I expect that in the future there will be clarification. But in the meantime, I think it does remove some of the gray area for people who are not planning on living in France long term and who are true digital nomads and who are going to be leaving France after a short amount of time. But it does not make things easier or any different from what I've been saying all along for those of you who would like to create a long-term life here. So, without further ado, those updates will be integrated into the new edition of Foolproof French Visas. In the meantime, we are going to go over to our set of questions so that we can start jumping into the Q&A. Okay, Millie, after having studied for a master's degree in French in an English language program, will the 1-year buffer for students looking for a job automatically be granted? If not, can they apply in France without going back to their home country? So in order to achieve this, in order to request the status of recherche d'emploi création d'entreprise, you have to be in a degree earning program that's accredited by France. If it's a private school where you're not earning an official French degree, it might not be eligible. And so you need to look closely at what the programs are in Campus France and talk to their admissions department about whether or not students have the option of requesting that recherche d'emploi création d'entreprise. Because even like some of the MBA programs are only 18 months, they're less than 2 years, they don't make you eligible for it. So you have to be really careful. Also, if your program is only in English and you don't have a good level of French, it's going to be really hard for you to find a job on this status because you're not going to have enough time to get your French up to the level that you need in order to get a job and get sponsored within the conditions of having that status. So you need to be really careful about the program that you pick. Janine, I've been hearing about some of the visas and read stories of women going to pastry school, for example, as a way to simplify life and move to France while switching careers. I am a master beekeeper and I also might like to try to simplify my life doing something I love to do, but is there a way to find a visa that works as well as a property? So I think I don't actually know if you were the person that I spoke to during the virtual summit and exhibition hall because I did speak to a beekeeper. So I'm not sure if it's you or if there's two of you. So, in order to work as a beekeeper, one of the things I talked about during the summit was we would have to look into the regulations about producing and selling your honey and what restrictions or what regulations you would need to follow to make sure that you were complying with food laws. Because even though you can have thousands of year old honey that is still edible, there are certainly still food safety regulations that do apply. So that would be one of the things we would need to look at and whether or not the expense and structure related to that particular job would require some kind of business structure, or whether you could potentially do that as auto entrepreneur. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that, of course, in any business that you're going to be setting up, we need to make sure that you're earning at least French minimum wage. This is another thing that went up recently. It was 1,823 euros a month. It just went up to 1,867 euros per month on June 1st. And so making sure that as we generate your business plan, we are helping you to understand how to reach that amount, because it doesn't do you any good to put together an ambitious business plan with if we're not able to back that up and enable you to actually make that amount of money. So part of that would be looking into what types of products can you make and sell? What kind of volume are you going to be able to do with the amount of bees that you have? Are there other products or services or experiences that you can offer, particularly if you're looking for a property, that you would be able to add into the business plan as well? And so that's something that would be really good to explore in the Complete French Business Incubator in the workshops that we're doing in July and August. We have a really good small group together that is going to be doing some additional calls to explore, to work more closely together on developing your business idea. And I think that would be a really good way to develop the idea and the business plan and see how it could work. And then determine, of course, what business type and visa would be the best for that structure. Debbie, how can I find a 3-month rental that allows 2 small dogs? So the first thing I want to say is that if you're looking for temporary housing for when you arrive in France, you don't want to reserve for 3 months unless it's something you can cancel partway through. There are apart hotels where you can reserve up to 3 months and then you can cancel with 1 week's notice at some point during your stay. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because within 3 months you need to validate your visa, and we want you to do that at a long-term address where you can get mail. You need to spend the first 4 to 6 weeks hitting the ground running and actively looking for a rental where you are going to be able to live long term, establish bills in your name, and get all of the admin set up that we're going to have to do for you or with you during your first year in France. So, not a good idea to reserve temporary housing for 3 months. Normally, we recommend 4 to 6 weeks, occasionally up to 8 weeks if you're going to a really high demand area like Nice or Montpellier or Paris, where the housing market is really difficult to navigate and difficult to find something. In terms of dogs, residential leases cannot prohibit pets, but short-term rentals can. So your best bet is to look and see if there are, like I said, an apart hotel that is pet friendly, or temporary housing, whether it's Airbnb or VRBO or Gîtes or anything like that that would be open to pets. Where can I find a rental in areas where a car is not necessary? So any big city, any of the biggest cities in France are going to have pretty good train systems and tram systems. Toulouse, Bordeaux, Montpellier, Nice all have great tram systems. Lyon has a great metro system. Marseille also has a really good tram system. Rennes has a good metro. Any of the cities will have, even some of the smaller ones like Rouen has a pretty good tram system. And then even smaller towns will have buses throughout the city, throughout the towns. So I would say if you look for towns that have a train station, and then either if you live within walking distance of the train station in the town center, or if there's a bus that you can take directly to the train station from where you live, just kind of look at the frequency of the trains and buses to see where you want to go. But France is generally pretty accessible, especially if you're living in one of the larger cities. Star, I need advice regarding a 25-year-old criminal record effect on a visa for my spouse to ensure that this won't be an obstacle for moving there and any visas. So I would say that, for one thing, there's no background check for most visa applications. The background check really only applies if you are starting a business. Also, if you are applying for naturalization, or, well, naturalization really, they will ask for a criminal record from any country where you've lived more than 6 months if you've lived in France for less than 10 years. So I would say it's something that's 25 years old will not be an issue and will not even show up on any kind of visa application. And then if you are in France for more than 10 years before you apply for naturalization, those are the current rules. they could change at some point, but normally it wouldn't show up or be any kind of issue. You mentioned an LLC is not necessary, but I have a sole proprietorship for decades in the US and would be working remotely, so I think I'd need an LLC to invoice to show income. I'd be working as a coach with remote clients and probably arrange to run transformational retreats in France or elsewhere in Europe. Is going for libérale the best solution, and what would I need to prove? Okay, so this is another example where I think that having a conversation and potentially attending the workshops as part of the Complete French Business Incubator would be a really good option for you. So the first thing to know is that you would be doing your coaching from France. It sounds like your plan is to live in France long term. And the retreats, especially, would be operating in France and on French territory. So you definitely need to have a French business structure. Now, normally I would recommend HAL if you were coaching. However, since you mentioned retreats in France and elsewhere in Europe, there might be travel expenses, transportation expenses. You might have expenses related to hosting your clients. So I'm going to say that you probably want to consider a business type that allows you to deduct expenses. And again, I think that would be something that we would need to run the numbers to see what makes sense. You do have to be careful with any kind of retreat because if you are providing transportation or lodging for people attending your retreats, then you could be considered a tour operator. And so the way that we need to organize the retreats and put together the business plan will have to make the distinction clear about whether you're operating a tour business, which would come with additional regulations or particular insurance. You might need to register with an entity called Atout France, or whether you are falling outside of those regulations because there are certain things that you're not offering to your clients. So again, I think the best thing is to develop the business plan within the Complete French Business Incubator and for us to have a chat specifically about what services you want to offer to whom and what would be included with these retreats, how much money you're going to make, things like that. You also mentioned collecting Social Security, but I want to remind you as well that if you are on a business visa for France, then it doesn't matter what other types of income you have. They are specifically looking at what income is coming from the business and is your business profitable. So they might initially look at Social Security for the first year or two to see that you have other funds while you're getting your business up and running. But in the long term, the prefecture is primarily going to look at your business registration, if you're operating the business seriously, how much money you're making from the business, and if you're able to pay yourself French minimum wage, which is again 1,867 euros per month. Julia, I'm 2 years out from my intended move. What should I be doing now to prepare? So you have a lot of time, and there's not a whole lot that you can do now in terms of ordering documents or getting paperwork together because I mean, the thing is that a lot of documents have to be under a certain amount of time. We want you to have, for example, a birth certificate less than 12 months old. Your driving record to exchange your driver's license has to be less than 3 months old at the time of the exchange. So we can't have you order that yet either. So I would say that I don't know if you attended the virtual summit or not, but I would say that you want to continue to attend the Q&As, continue to ask questions about the various topics that we covered in the virtual summit, that you potentially watch the replays and take notes, connect with some of the professionals there, and you kind of put together your relocation team where those of us who are going to be supporting you on your move, whether it's, us handling your visa or somebody answering your tax questions and things like that. One thing I would say you do want to talk to someone about is, as you're making the decision to move and planning your move, is if you have a trust, think about whether or not it can be dissolved or transformed in some kind of way before you become a French tax resident, because trusts are not really acknowledged by the French tax office. They're more considered to be vehicles for tax evasion than vehicles for facilitating inheritance. So you might want to talk to a professional about that and how you can either what the reporting requirements will be if you choose to keep it in place, or if you choose to dissolve it before you become a French resident, which might be the easier solution, what you're going to need to do for that. And then anything else you have in terms of assets or estate planning or things like that, you might want to talk to a professional just to see how your wishes would be implemented in France and if there's anything in particular you need to keep in mind. Cynthia, does a visitor visa allow you to go back and forth from the US to France and keep it valid? So Yes, and I'm going to say yes with a huge caveat. A visitor visa is not the option to stay as many days as you want in France. A visitor visa is a commitment to living in France with the status of visitor and not working and being retired in France. The reason I am making that distinction is because I have met with a lot of people who have gotten the visitor visa and think like, oh, it's really just about allowing me to go back and forth as much as I want. What happens is they don't exchange their driver's license, they don't get set up in the French healthcare system, they may or may not set up a French bank account and actually use it. They're not spending very many days inside of France. And when it comes time to renew that visa, they are not meeting the requirements for renewal. The electronic or the EES, the entry exit system that tracks your entry and exit from the EU, can now like determine whether or not you've spent enough time in France. And if you are not moving your life to France, then you're going to have a problem at renewal. So, yes, you can travel back and forth, but you need to plan to be spending at least around 9 months out of the year in France. I have seen rejections online, not of Americans, but of people of other nationalities, where they have been rejected for spending as little as 4 months out of 12 outside of France during their 1 year visa. Because if you have a visa that you are renewing, you are telling the French government that you reside in France, and that needs to be true. Can you renew a visitor visa while living in the country, or do you need to go back to the US to renew it? So if you have a renewable visitor visa, this is what people call the VLSTS, but VLSTS stands for about a dozen type of visas. The visa de long séjour valant titre de séjour. So you go online, you validate it with OPI after you arrive. It becomes your first titre de séjour, and then it is renewable for you to get a carte de séjour at the end of your first year in France. Has to be renewed about 4 months before your visa expires. At the latest, 2 months, but really it's a good idea to do it at the 4 month mark. In order to renew it, the renewal is done online, but then you're going to need to go physically in person to the prefecture to pick up your card. If you have a non-renewable visa, then it needs to be renewed back in the US. So if you are like doing the working remotely thing, you need to get a temporary visa called a VLST, a visa de long séjour temporaire, which is not renewable or extendable in France, and then you need to leave at the end of it. And that's the type that would enable you to work remotely on it if that's what you want, because it's not making you a resident of France in any kind of way. B. Regarding the proof of funds to be submitted, I have heard that French authorities do not look favorably upon including funds currently invested on the stock market as part of the total capital. Is this true? Yes, you need to show them cash. When you're showing them that you meet the minimum financial requirements for the visa, you either need to show them cash or you need to show something like a social security statement that says you're going to get X amount of dollars per month. That exceeds the minimum of 1,500 euros per month. So I see there's a question in here too about the financial requirements going up for the visitor permit. It went up slightly because it always goes up. It's net SMEEK. So gross SMEEK used to be 1,823 euros per month, which was 1,443 euros per net per month. Now it's 1,867 euros per month, which is about 1,480 per month net. Now we always round up, so I've been saying 1,500 per month. I've been saying that for probably 2 or 3 years. So if you've been following my advice of 1,500, then there's already a little bit of buffer built in. However, for the sake of making things easier at the prefecture, I would say 2,000 or even 2,500 of regular transfers every single month into your French bank account to show to the prefecture at the end of the first year would be even better. Insufficient funds can be a decisive factor leading to the rejection of a visa application. Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I saw somebody recently who had that exact situation where she was just a little bit under the amount and she was bringing her daughter with her, and they considered that it wasn't enough and it was rejected for insufficient funds. Now, fortunately, in her case, she was able to, cash out another account to increase the amount that she had available, but you absolutely need to have a comfortable cushion above the minimum and potentially ongoing income, because even though 1,500 euros a month is the minimum, is it enough to live on? It's hard. Is it enough to live on in a city like Nice or Paris? Definitely not. So it depends a little bit on where you're going to. Arlington. What are the new guidelines around working remotely in the long stay visitor visa? I am self-employed with remote work and all my clients are in the US. What visa can I do? Okay, so that was a situation that we discussed a little bit in the beginning. If you are not living in France long term and you want to come for 3 months on your passport, if you want to get a temporary visa for 6 months and then go back to the US, then I would say there's not really an issue with working remotely. If you are if you want to create a long-term life in France and move here on a permanent basis, then you need to get a visa that would enable you to set up your business in France. And again, that would depend on how much income are you earning from your business? What is the best structure? What expenses do you have? I always want to have a conversation with anybody that we're helping to start a business to make sure that one, I know what visa type and business structure is going to be the best fit for you. Two, that I can verify that you meet the requirements for if you're setting up a talent passport entrepreneur and you need to have 5 years of experience or a master's degree. I need to go through that with you to make sure that what you have and the documentation that you have to prove it is going to be sufficient for getting approval. Because I don't want to prepare your visa application and get to the end and then realize that we don't have the paperwork we need and you're not going to get the visa type that we requested. So yeah, I would want to have a conversation with you about your business to see what the best visa option would be. Jerry, what is the status of having immigrant retirees pay something for their health insurance? So this is one of the reasons why we haven't updated foolproof French visas yet. I assume that as soon as I publish the next edition of foolproof French visas, they will come out with the decree. So I'm hoping that, me publishing the next edition of the book will spur further changes so that we have a bit of clarity. But right now, there is no status on that. It will be published at some point, determined by someone. There's no, there are no guidelines on what it will be or when it will be published, but I will keep you posted when it happens. Saffron, regarding taxes and inheritance, am I better off owning a home in France or having more savings when I die? In other words, if I were to make the decision between renting and buying based purely on financial, tax, or inheritance reasons, which would be the smarter thing to do? So it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of, you know, assuming equal value. I guess the questions would be one, who are your heirs and where do they live? Two, would somebody want to inherit your house in France and be able to potentially pay the inheritance tax or something so that they could own it outright, or would it have to be sold? Three, do you care? How closely related are you to your heirs? These are all questions that you should ask a notaire who would be able to talk through the contents of your will and who your heirs are and what the potential tax burden might be to them, or how easy it would be for your will to be followed under French law. If it's your spouse, then it doesn't really matter. If it's, you have a mixed family and you have stepchildren or things like that, then it becomes a lot more complicated. And I am not a notaire or a tax attorney, and I cannot advise you on inheritance. I would say the other thing you might want to consider looking into is something called a viager, Viager, and that is when you basically have a reverse mortgage. So if you own a property and then you sell it under viager and the person pays you basically a monthly rent or mortgage payment, and then you get to live in the home until you die. And then upon your death, the property is transferred to the person who buys it. So it's a little bit of a gamble for the person buying because obviously if you die next year, then it's a great deal for them. If you live for another 30 years, then it's a little bit less of a good deal. And actually, I've read stories about an elderly person who sold her home under viager and then lived for another 40 years and outlived both the person who originally bought the property under viager and then their son or something. So so that's another thing to consider too, is like if you want to own your house, but then don't necessarily have anyone who's interested in having it after your death and you want to make things a little bit easier for your heirs, you can potentially use a viager. It also gets you, extra spending money in your later years of life. Yumi, can I apply for the Entrepreneur Profession Libérale for a content creator such as YouTube channel in France? You need to apply for that visa from the country where you have residence or citizenship. So you would need to apply before you leave. If you are already in France with a visitor visa, you would first need to renew that, and then you would need to apply for a change of status, and it could take up to 2 years. So you always want to start with, you start as you mean to continue in terms of the visa type that you want to get. Whether or not you can do that for being a content creator, you certainly can, but we would have to make sure, again, that it's a viable activity, that we have proof of how you're going to make income. It's going to be hard if you're just starting out and you don't have any kind of like contracts or, followers or anything like that. There would need to be something else to go along with it. But in any case, you would need to have a registered business to do that type of activity in France. If you have that type of activity in the US or in your home country, then you would need to have an appropriate self-employment visa to be able to monetize that and be doing it from France. There are people on the internet where they have companies that are registered in random places like Dubai, and they're filming all of their videos in the different parks in Paris and providing services from France. That's not cool. Something that you should pay attention to actually if you're watching things on social media. Kevin, when setting up the initial few months of accommodation to satisfy the visa requirements, do the accommodations need to be paid for prior to applying for the visa, or a proof of booking suffice? It doesn't really matter. I think they're going to pay closer attention if your financial resources are lower and they're not sure if you're going to have enough money to pay for the housing and still have enough for your living expenses. So yeah, kind of depends on how much they are versus how much you have it available to you in funds overall. I tend to think it's better if they're paid for, but sometimes if people reserve something, they want to have 3 months because they feel safer, but I also give the guidance that you should be in your permanent long-term address by month 2. So sometimes people want to reserve longer and then cancel, or book something that's going to be refundable if you cancel because you found housing, and that's fine as long as you're going to have the money to pay for everything. Lee, does the French healthcare system pay for Ozempic or Mounjaro? While France in general will be a healthier lifestyle, I'm severely overweight and need to lose a lot sooner in order to avoid serious health issues. I believe they were not covering it, but I think they just started saying that they were going to cover it in certain circumstances. However, depending on how you move to France and whether or not you're working or registering a business activity after you arrive, there's probably going to be a good period of several months, up to 6 months or so, before you are covered by the French healthcare system. So none of the policies that you would have to get for your visa application are going to cover pre-existing conditions, and they won't cover those medications. So you'd have to pay out of pocket for at least a couple of months. Kevin, my wife is a UK citizen and resident alien of the US. We live in the US, so she would apply for her visa in the US, correct? Yes. You can apply for your visa in a country where you have citizenship or legal residence, so she would be able to apply in either. However, assuming that you do not have any kind of status in the UK, it would be obviously better for you to apply together in the US. Kimberly, in business plan development and visa application for profession libérale, what is your guidance for positioning two types of not dissimilar activities? Both are in the business advisory realm, but one is focused on training, coaching employees within companies, and the other is more strategic advisory. Does it make sense to focus the business plan on A and add B? Those sound similar enough to me that we could put them together in the business, but I would want to take a look at how that works. And I would say part of it's going to depend on whether or not you have any potential clients or interest in one more than the other. If you have interest in both, if you have significant overlap in the types of clients that are going to sign up for one service or the other, and you can upsell them or cross-sell them to the other service. I would want to see that in the context of the business plan and how we're developing the overall strategy. In showing investment account statements and bank activity for profession libérale purposes, how necessary is it to be able to demonstrate a record of consistent transfers of a set amount from an investment account to a bank account versus just showing funds in the investment account that meet or exceed the threshold? So you have to show, for a visa application, you need to give them 3 months of bank statements. Not all 3 months have to exceed the minimum of, 1,500 euros per month times 12. But obviously the most recent one at least does. And again, you want the cash amount to be showing more than the minimum, not the investments themselves, because investments can lose value if the stock market crashes, for example. John, I'm planning on applying for LSTS. I assume you mean the visitor visa sometime in the fourth quarter of 2026. However, my US passport expires in December of 27, so it will not extend for 6 months beyond the time when my visa expires. Should I wait until my passport is renewed before I apply for the visa? I would renew your passport now. You can renew your passport. You can't use the online, if you're physically present in the US, you cannot use the online renewal form more than 12 months before your passport expires. However, you can go to the post office with the physical form and renew your passport earlier than 12 months. If you renew your passport from outside the US, if you're in France, like you send it into the US embassy, it takes a couple of weeks. You can do it at any time. You cannot use the online form in that situation. So my advice would be renew your passport now before you apply for your visa, and then you just have a new passport and you don't have to worry about it. My second best amount of advice would be they will not give you a visa longer than your passport's validity. But if your visa is going from November to November, that would be fine. But then you'll need to renew your passport within the first 6 months in France before we do basically anything else. So renew your passport now. Linda will go to the consulate in Atlanta and then move to Nice. I would advise avoiding Atlanta if you can. They are not great. I have a certified copy of my birth certificate. It is date stamped for 2015. Is that okay, or do I need one dated this year? So I would recommend ordering a new birth certificate right before you leave, because now the healthcare system is requesting birth certificates less than 12 months old for US citizens. Yeah, Chris, don't believe everything TLS tells you. Yeah, so I will show it to tie my original maiden name to the name to my married name, although I'm divorced. I will also have a copy of the original marriage certificate and sealed copy of the divorce papers. Yeah, so the birth certificate should be less than 1 year old when you apply for your health care, which you'll start the process 3 months after you arrive in France. So make sure to order that pretty close to when you're going to leave. For the marriage and divorce certificate, it doesn't matter. Okay, Chris. It needs to be the most recent 3 months. We applied in May, but our appointment was after June 1st. They told us our application would be rejected unless we supplied May. Yeah, that's bullshit, Chris. Sorry, but TLS doesn't know what they're doing. I mean, yeah, you should go with the three most recent bank statements. But if you go on June 1st and or, the first week in June and you don't have May statement yet, then it's fine. And what you should do in this situation is you tell them that they can send off all of the documents that you have given them to the consulate, and the consulate can make the decision. Unfortunately, they don't know what the requirements are. It's not their job to figure out whether to accept it or not. There are a couple of TLS people who are on a power trip and it's not okay, and they don't really know what the requirements are. But don't come in here and tell me what the requirements are. This is what I do every day, and I have to straighten these things out for people when TLS doesn't know what they're talking about. So I don't know, what TLS did you go to, Chris, to avoid it? Because TLS and VFS have told my clients all kinds of ridiculous things. They've said things like, your 12-year-old isn't getting a visa because he doesn't have a work contract. They've said at one point they told our clients that they weren't getting their visa because they didn't have a 12-month lease. We've had them complain about, I think this one was in Seattle, we had them complain about giving them documents in French because all of the legal documents for registering a business in France are shockingly in French, and they didn't know what they were. And the person said, "Oh, well, I only speak Spanish." So yeah, you can't trust what TLS says, and you need to push back on silly requests. I mean, something like that, you can actually get the document, fine, just get it. But if they're telling you something that is wrong, then you need to know that it's wrong and push back, because they are not adequately trained in the visa types and the actual requirements. Can we access the recordings to this? I just came in. Yes, so this will go up on YouTube later. Star, my recommendation was for you to come to the Complete French Business Incubator workshops to develop your business plan more. Okay, we answered that one. Jack, would it be possible to work in France with a South African degree in speech therapy? I'm currently living in the UK. Unfortunately, that is probably not going to be converted or recognized in France. My recommendation would be I recently did a podcast interview with the president of an organization called Sprint, which helps the families of children with special needs in France, and they have a lot of need for English speaking speech therapists and orthophonistes. So my advice would be to potentially get in touch with them. There are certain things that you can do, but speech therapy or being an orthophoniste would be regulated by the French system. So you'd need to find a little bit of a workaround, which is something, again, that we would do in terms of the business incubator and the workshops that I'm going to be hosting in the next couple months over the summer. So that, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be able to do like the regulated part of the activity, but there are plenty of English speaking families that could use additional support for their children. And I'm sure there's something that you could provide in terms of, consulting or working with these kids in a legal way so that you're not running afoul of any regulations that you would have to follow. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, most things that are regulated or that have some kind of a degree would need, yeah, if it's something that's regulated, you wouldn't most degrees from outside of the EU are not going to be recognized. So you have to come up with something adjacent or pivot in some kind of way. So for example, I've had clients who are like registered nurses who obviously can't do anything medical anymore. And then they pivot to offering like holistic health coaching to women. Or we have clients who we have clients who are therapists who they're not practicing as like psychologue, they're practicing as psychopraticien. So they can't call themselves therapists, they can call themselves psychopraticien. Clients who are in bookkeeping or accounting or working providing those financial services to businesses in the US, and we pivot it to more coaching and fractional CFO kind of stuff in France. Unfortunately, I'm not fully fluent in French yet, and so my question is whether for age 70 plus, are you exempt from the language test for the 10-year residence card? Yes. So if you are over 65, you are exempt from the civics test, the OFI civics classes, and the language requirement for the 10-year card. You are not exempt from those if you want to apply for naturalization. You would have to meet those same requirements. Chris, I believe you that they said that, but they're wrong. So unfortunately there are a lot of untrained people at TLS and they give a lot of bad advice. But I've been doing this job for over a decade and I've seen a lot of terrible TLS and VFS things. So don't come on here to argue with me about what the actual requirements are for the visas because that's what I'm here to tell you. Tana, how developed does a business idea need to be before enrolling in the business incubator? So that's a really good question. I would say you should have an idea of what your skills are that you want to turn into a business and vaguely what kind of services or what kind of business you want to be running. So the three workshops that we're going to be doing over the summer, let me pull them up for you. Okay, so our three workshops this summer, we have July 16th, finding your viable business idea. So that's where we're going to talk about your skills, your experience, what you want to be doing in France, the ideas that you have from your business, and how we can narrow it down from the things that you do and the things that you're good at and have professional experience in until into what you're going to develop your business around and kind of narrow it down to what is your business idea that you're going to develop because as I always talk about, you don't want to have a couple of different things floating around that it's not really clear how you're going to make money or who your clients are going to be or multiple different things with different target markets and different clients and all of that. We want to focus that into what things that go together and fit together very neatly and will make a coherent business plan that's in line with your skills and experience. So that's going to be workshop number one. Workshop number two is going to be designing a business that supports your life in France. So that's where we're going to talk about what are the income requirements? What is your pricing going to look like? How many clients are you going to need to get up to French minimum wage? Where are you going to be able to do your marketing and things like that? Who is your target market in France? How are we going to identify and find potential clients for you? Because remember too that when you when you're developing your business idea for specifically for profession libérale, you will need to have potential clients in France that are going to write letters of support for you or say that they're going to be your potential clients. And then workshop 3 in August is going to be turning your idea into a visa-ready business plan. So here's where we're going to map out the business plan, talk about the financial projections, what should go in the financial projections, how you're going to be positioned in the market for France. So these are 3 additional workshops that are for people who are doing the Complete French Business Incubator. So normally the business incubator is 2 45-minute consultations plus I review your business plan. But in this case, we're having a little group with these 3 additional workshops so that you get support in developing the business and who's going to be your potential clients and what is your business going to look like in France so that you get additional support in writing the business plan yourself that then again I will review. I'm retired but work part-time as a musician in the US, moving to Rennes, not likely to make 1,867 euros per month, alternative to a work visa. So you'll have to get a visitor visa to be retired. There's no part-time work visa. You either start a business or self-employment to be able to meet minimum wage, or you're retired and can support yourself. There's unfortunately nothing in between. What is the new cost for a retirement visa? So the visa itself hasn't changed. There's the appointment fee for TLS, which has gone up dramatically. There's the visa processing fee, which is 99 euros for a visitor visa. And then when you arrive in France and you validate your visa, it used to be 200 euros, now it's 300 euros. There's also a cost to now to exchange your driver's license, and which is 40 euros. Yumi, I'd like to handle the online application myself and then engage your services once I have successfully obtained the long stay visa. Is it possible? It's possible, but it's not necessarily going to be cheaper. We have packages that cover basically your visa application through your first 6 months or so in France, and we collect all of the documents required for all of the things that we need to do in one form. So a lot of the work that we're doing is organizing and making sure that your documents are put together correctly for your visa application and also using those documents for other things. Typically, what we do in that situation, if somebody comes to us and says, oh, I already got my visa, but I need help with all of the stuff after arrival, we normally say, okay, well, we'll do the same package that we normally do for a visitor visa, except that instead of including the initial visa application, we'll include doing the renewal instead. So that's how we normally handle those situations. What is the new fee for TLS for a retirement visa? So the TLS is up for an appointment fee, and that's regardless of the visa type. You can get an exemption from the appointment fee if you're a student in certain circumstances, or if you are the spouse of a French citizen. But for pretty much everybody else, it's 220 euros for the appointment fee, which works out to usually about 250 to $51. Funnily enough, they don't seem to have very many regular appointments, and so then they also charge 80 extra dollars to have a primetime appointment early in the morning or late in the afternoon around business hours. So my recommendation would be to plan to spend 330 to $50 per person because in many cases those regular time appointments are not readily available. Okay, so this was our last call before the summer. Am we are off in August and we will resume our monthly Q&As on September 7th, Monday, September 7th. If you would like to schedule a consultation with me, I still do have a few available from the summit replays that will happen over the summer. And I'm going to give you the link to the summit recordings again if you haven't yet had the chance to watch those. Okay, so this is the link to the summit recordings. This is the link to the Complete French Business Incubator. I still have a couple of spots left for joining me in the workshops, and those are going to be July 16th, July 30th, and August 13th. And other than that, we will keep you posted when Foolproof French Visas is updated. Again, if you already purchased it, don't purchase it again. Just send us an email so that we can let you know how to get added to our digital, like the ebook, so that you can get an ebook copy when we update it. All right. Thank you so much for coming, and I will see you at the next Q&A in, okay, one more. With the digital nomad situation now being allowed, how do you predict that will impact people moving to France not to work but retire? Will processing a visa slow down? Okay, so I think you missed what I said at the beginning about working remotely. The rules about working remotely have not drastically changed. If you are not planning to live long-term in France and you're not becoming a tax resident and your income will be taxed outside of France, then you can work remotely if you are on your passport as a visitor or if you have a temporary visa that is not making you a tax resident. If you're creating a long-term life in France, then you need to have a visa that enables you to work and make sure that your taxes are and social charges are properly paid in France. So I would recommend when the recording comes out, go and watch what I said at the beginning because, and I've also talked about this on Threads and put it up on our website because the answer from the Ministry of the Economy does not say what certain people who are financially interested in being able to work remotely on a visitor visa, like what they're making it say. It doesn't say it. So there's been a lot of chatter on social media where all the influencers say like, "Oh, now we can work remotely." That's not, it is way oversimplifying, and I would ask questions about who's paying your tax bill when you get caught doing that. So, yeah, this isn't going to impact people coming to France as retirees. They're processed through two different offices. So, okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. I will see you all next time. And yeah, hope to see some of you watching the replays and maybe even in our Complete French Business Incubator workshops this summer. Have a good night. Bye.